Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Katie Halper Show. Really excited to be here. We have two people with us right now. So many people watching us, of course. And welcome, everyone. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Make sure that you like this. Make sure you give this a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe. Okay, now that I've gotten all the really tacky things out of the way, I want to welcome to the show, making his Katie Halper Show debut, Corey Robin, a distinguished professor of political science at Brooklyn College and the CUNY Graduate Center, and the author of The Enigma of Clarence Thomas and the hailed, influential book called The Reactionary Mind, Conservatism from Edmund Burke to Donald Trump. So welcome, Corey.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
And with us, rejoining us once again, is Trevor Beaulieu, who is the host of the Champagne Sharks podcast, and a lawyer and a writer, journalist, pop culture critic. Right?
Hey, how's it going? Always a pleasure. Yeah, pretty good.
So actually, not to tear down the fourth wall, which I do as much as I can on the show, if I'm being honest, but before we went live, Trevor, you were complimenting Corey on his book. Reactionary Mind, and we're going to get into Corey's really great piece that he has on. It's at CoreyRobin.com. Was it published elsewhere, or was it a CoreyRobin.com original?
I think
Impeachment.
Oh yeah, I think Jacobin ran it as well.
Oh, it was Jacobin. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So he has a great piece on the question of impeachment and what it could mean. But first, let's spill some tea. What were you saying, T? Oh my God, no pun intended. What were you just saying about the Reactionary Mind?
Oh, I mean, that's not tea. I was saying, no, I was saying that's a great book. I had Corey on to talk about primarily the Clarence Thomas book. And then on the back end, we talked about Reactionary Mind. And I had read the Clarence Thomas book in full, but I had read half of the Reactionary Mind and skimmed the rest, to get it all in under the wire before he came on. And I was just telling Corey that I had finished reading the Reactionary Mind in earnest after he appeared, and I had so regretted not having had the time to do so before he appeared, because I had so many other questions. But I told him it was a very paradigm shifting way for me to look at the right. And I feel like there's a lot of things that promise to give you a look at the right or the alt-right and be some kind of Rosetta Stone for it, and end up having kind of a glib facile analysis. But his was, if anything, I think under promised and over delivered.
That's a good way to do it. That's the trick, right?
Thank you.
I should just interview you, T, about Corey's book.
I can go now.
Yeah.
Like a test, right?
Yeah. And Corey, you can tell me about Champagne Sharks. Well, do you want to share the paradigm shift? We can get back to that because I want to focus on this, but I also don't want to silence you. So T, if you have it in a sentence, what would you be able to share the paradigm shift that happened in your brain, in your non-reactionary mind?
Oh, well, it kind of, there's a lot of things that people say about the right that I think everyone just says it because everyone else says it. It's like a received wisdom. So it's like the conservatives want to conserve and things like that. And Corey made a great case for how it's a lot more than just wanting to preserve the past, that there's a lot of actual activism and desire for change involved in the reactionary mind. It's not just like, hey, we hate change. There's very much a positive vision in mind, besides just not liking things changing or in absence of ideas, so to speak.
All right, I like it. We'll take it. So let's move to the progressive mind of Corey Robin and talk about his latest piece on the question of impeachment and what it could mean. And can you just tell us about this book? I guess before the thesis. Can you tell us the thesis? Then I'm going to ask you about some of the things that you mentioned in the beginning about how Reagan's legacy is still with us or not with us. But yeah, what is the thesis of this piece?
Wait, of the piece or of the book? I'm sorry.
Sorry, the piece.
The impeachment. Yeah.
The impeachment piece. Yeah.
The basic thesis is simple, that impeachment could be and sometimes in the past has been a way that a party essentially repudiates and helps destroy an existing regime. And I think the classic example is the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. The Republican Party had led the effort to emancipate, to abolish slavery. And Andrew Johnson really, at the end of the Civil War, wanted to kind of drag it back and stop that. And the Republican Party decided that, they weren't going to have it. And he was impeached. He was acquitted by one vote. But essentially at that point, even though he remained in power, the Republican Party, the congressional Republicans, took over the process. And that's what, you really get radical Reconstruction. And so in theory, what we could have right now is if the Democratic Party were serious about repudiating the Reagan regime, the neoliberal regime, this would be a great opportunity. Unlike the first impeachment of Trump, which was very much a kind of very narrow, technical, whole set of issues that, involve, let's set that aside. What happened on January the 6th, whatever word you want to use for it, I think that, a good part of the Republican Party revealed its hand as being hostile, fundamentally hostile to I wouldn't say the reality, but to the promise of a multiracial democracy. And this is a signal, for a real political party to then say, if that's where you stand, and if you're going to use illegal methods to preserve that, you have forsaken, you have sacrificed, you have betrayed your right to rule. And you will no longer be in a position to do that. And we are going to fundamentally transform the terms and categories of American politics in order to permanently keep this kind of politics out. Not these people, but this kind of politics. We are going to repudiate it. And that's what an impeachment could be. That's not, of course, what the Democratic Party really wants to do. That decision was already made when they decided not to nominate Bernie Sanders. And so we are going to have, not quite that. But I thought it was important not to be neither a cheerleader nor a cynic about impeachment, to say that there is a promise of what it could be. But also to point out that it's, more than likely that is not what it's going to be.
And what did you think? So you wrote this before, right? The impeachment. And
yeah.
What did you think of the impeachment? You mentioned the promise of impeachment. How fulfilled was that, or was that not?
I mean, I should also say, we are not yet in a position to have a realignment and a kind of repudiation of the Reagan regime. And even though Trump has now been impeached for a second time, and I'll say something more about that in a second, the process whereby this repudiation realignment is going to happen is going to be over a period of years. But one thing I was surprised by, to be honest with you, is that 10 Republicans joined the impeachment and 4 Republicans didn't vote at all. I think I wouldn't, hang my professor card on this, but I think that's the most bipartisan vote for an impeachment in American history. I know it seems small for many people, but the fact of the matter is it's quite significant. We'll see what will happen in the Senate. I think what's more interesting, frankly, is not from the Democratic point of view, but what this is going to do to the Republican Party. I think that's the more interesting question. But that's where we are.
And you say in your piece that, where is it? You quote your book, understandably, and you say that the last sentence of the Reactionary Mind says, "How much the Reagan regime will take with it on its way out remains to be seen." And you say, sorry, let me read the full sentence. I'm going to read the first paragraph, actually, if that's okay. Over the last, unless you want to read it, it's short.
No.
I realize. Okay, over the last 4 years, I've argued that this is a potential moment of realignment where the Reagan regime we've been living under could be shattered and repudiated and replaced by a new political regime. One of the reasons I press so hard on the Trump-Carter comparison is to point out that the Reagan regime, like the New Deal regime in the 1970s, is more vulnerable than we realize. I continue to maintain that Trump's inability to rule, most spectacularly put on display this past week, reflects the crumbling power of that regime. that doesn't mean the regime can't do damage on its way out. The last sentence of the Reactionary Mind makes a point of saying how much the Reagan regime will take with it on its way out remains to be seen, but that regime is far weaker than at any point since its inception. So that's a kind of controversial thing to say for many people, right? And last week I had a debate on fascism with Jason Stanley, Jody Dean, Eugene Puryear, Daniel Bessner, and Samuel Moyn. And I often think of you and Samuel Moyn as making somewhat similar arguments. So can you explain to people what you mean about how it's weakened and how Trump had an inability to rule and at the same time did damage?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the first thing is to look at Trump's presidency in historical perspective. And by that, I mean in comparison to Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and George W. Bush. On a whole bunch of measures, there is just no doubt that the Trump presidency was relative to those presidencies, far weaker. Number one, in terms of the level of support, popular support that he had going in, it was the lowest level of popular support of any of these presidents. And remember, those other three were reelected. And in the case of Nixon and Reagan, in landslide elections. Trump, of course, was not. Second, if you look at the actual things that he managed to do in terms of getting a program through Congress, with the exception of the tax cuts, he was an extraordinarily weak leader. And not just on, certain kind of Republican issues, but on some signature Trump issues. So he was never able to get an immigration bill through Congress, even when his own party controlled the entire Congress. He was never able to get his Congress to pay for a wall, again, even when his own party was able to. And you could just go through, I mean, I don't want to bore all your readers, and I've written about this a ton, but, it's just after thing after thing after thing. Where he was successful was in the appointment of judges, which has always been, the thing that a lot of, McConnell types have cared the most about. In fact, it's Mitch McConnell who made those judges happen. But in terms of advancing the Republican Party agenda, he was actually singularly ineffective. And so I think on the one hand, you have to really look at that kind of weakness in terms of creating hegemony over the electorate. And a quote I often like to use is from Margaret Thatcher. After she retired, she was asked, what do you think is your greatest achievement? And without missing a beat, she said, Tony Blair. And what did she mean by that? She meant it was her ability to impose her will and the Tory vision, not on their own party, right, but on the opposition party. That was what was the truly transformative impact. And that is what Nixon, Reagan, and Bush did. Trump, and this is no brief for the Democrats, but what is amazing about Trump is how much, in fact, the Democratic Party consistently opposed him, even on the tax cuts. I mean, Reagan got over 150 Democrats to vote for his tax cuts. Bush got about 40 Democrats. Trump got 0 Democrats to vote. So, and there's a whole bunch of other things. So all those are the measures of his weakness. However, and I think this is what people come back to, it is no doubt that he was able to inflict damage, tremendous damage, material damage, on a host of communities, on a host of regulations, and all the rest of it. And that is true. And so if the question was, is he, a damaging president? Is he a cruel president? There was never a question. But I think it was really important for people to get very clear that as, viewed in historical perspective, this is a political movement that is extraordinarily weak. And nothing that happened on January 6th changes that fact. There was no chance that they were going to be able to reverse the outcome of that election. And there's nothing to suggest that Trump or the Republican Party have improved their standing since what happened on January 6th. Quite the opposite. What that means long term, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. But I think, it's just very important.
And Jetty?
Say again?
What about a Sagar and Jetty? I'm sorry, I couldn't reach the crystal ball joke. I'm very sorry. The rising joke. Yeah.
Get it. So anyway, but that's kind of where I fall out on that question.
You were sorry, I cut you off. You don't have a crystal ball, but any suspicions or?
Well, I mean, I think the Republican Party is in for a very tough reckoning. I think, it's been very clear, it was very clear from the moment that Trump was nominated that he was a bad candidate. He was going to be a weak leader, but that he was also the best the Republican Party could do. And I hesitate to make predictions on this one, but my sense is that, there's going to be a real falling out within them because it's not clear who is going to inherit his mantle. I don't think they can do much better than he. I think they're in for a pretty rough patch.
It's interesting because when you said that, Margaret Thatcher's greatest achievement was Tony Blair, it reminds me a bit of the way that Trump's greatest achievement was, or maybe the Dems' greatest achievement was Donald Trump in a way, right? Because, to the extent that the Democrats helped create the conditions that led to Trump, now what they've been able to do, right, is that has so shifted the Overton window in terms of not just policy, but obviously aesthetic and rhetoric, that now they're just able to oppose Trump. That's what they've been able to do, right? Sign on to his war budgets, give him all the money he wants for the military, for the Pentagon, say that he's a deranged Cheeto Mussolini, also urge him to be more belligerent with Putin, which never made any sense. But I wonder if that is, it is this kind of, I'm imagining, remembering that photo of the Clintons with Trump. But, this does seem like a very good move for class warfare.
Right. Yeah, I mean, just when you said that about the Democrats complaining that he's a Mussolini and then complaining that he doesn't be more belligerent with Putin, that's that old joke, Jewish couple, complaining about a restaurant and they're like, the food's so bad, and the other one says, yeah, and the portions are so small,
right? And
that's always seemed to me to be this weird left kind of split response. I think the bigger question is, how good has Trump been for the Democrats? I think he's actually been quite good, but I would sort of spin it in a slightly different direction. Because, sort of, you mentioned budgets. If you look at the budgets that Donald Trump passed, and I won't, let's set the military to one side for a second. The truth of the matter is that they were more liberal in many ways than Barack Obama's budgets. He had very little, which is not that Barack Obama was so progressive or liberal himself, but they, when it came to kind of core Democratic programs, there was just a piece in the New York Times or the Washington Post, remember all that, the liberals got very, nervous. He's going to abolish the National Endowment of Arts. Right. Well, of course, he not only did not, they increased spending on the National Endowment of Arts. They never, increased spending on Planned Parenthood. There's been a whole bunch of things. Kind of culture war sorts of issues where he and the Republicans have spent like Democrats. So, I think to that extent, actually, he's been good for the Democrats. I think he also, the Democrats were kind of wishy-washy on, worse than wishy-washy on immigration. And I think, Trump made toxic certain kinds of positions on immigration. Public opinion is more pro-immigrant today than it was before Donald Trump was elected. So, I think, he helped, we heard a lot of talk about norm erosion. He helped consolidate a lot of liberal norms throughout the society just because his name came to be attached to certain kinds of things that previously American society was kind of like, we want to restrict immigration. And now majority says, maybe not. That's Trump. That's fascism. So I think in that extent, actually, he's been, I think he's been a kind of clarifying, agent for many, for a lot of, I wouldn't say necessarily left-wing positions, but kind of liberal positions.
Right. But then, of course, he's like the opposite of Bernie Sanders, the equal opposite, in terms of that clarity, the moral clarity. Just whatever the opposite of Trump is becomes the clearly moral position. Yeah. But then, of course, the danger is that the Dems will just, not we'll have like one fewer kid in a cage and then be like, but we're not Trump.
Right.
So that's
yeah. And I think that's, I've been watching very carefully. It hasn't gotten that much attention at all, but Biden's moves on immigration are very much kind of like one step forward, two steps back.
Right.
And I'll be curious to see how much attention they get, given how much attention was focused on that issue under Trump. And of course, there's a really, sobering precedent, which is that a lot of the things, I remember this very clearly, that liberals and Democrats were extraordinarily upset about under George W. Bush. Once Barack Obama came in and took, some of those things over, you saw, a kind of, diminution in concern about that. But, I think if we could just pull back, just for 1 second, and what I really see happening here, the thing that concerns me the most at this point is that with the exception of Barack Obama's first 2 years in office, where he was actually able to accomplish quite a bit. I mean, people forget, but there was a flurry of legislation he was able to get through, and then it all came to a stop. And so that was in 2010 when it really came to a stop. From 2010 to today, we have been in a situation, I think, of paralysis, broadly bipartisan paralysis, where you have not seen big legislative advances of any kind of a policy agenda, whether on the left or the right. Trump ruled primarily through a series of executive orders, which Joe Biden is going to now undo and do his own version of executive orders. But he was not able to get legislation through. Barack Obama in the last 6 years of his presidency was not. And given the makeup of where we are right now, it doesn't look to me like necessarily Joe Biden is going to get that much done. And so I think, as I try to step back from the emotion of this moment, which, has been intense for understandable reasons, we are really in a kind of political wilderness here, where, neither side can advance a kind of political agenda. And so that means, sort of this ongoing neoliberal rot that continues, and where all you're doing is relying on these executive orders and hoping that somehow a president can deliver you from this paralysis. And that is not, given the scope of the challenges we're facing, like that is not a good position to be in. And that's what I fear we are going to be in, is, sort of 2 to 4 more years of the same thing, where you just have this this toggling between a kind of neoliberal, white racist, ethno-nationalist party on the one hand, and then a neoliberal multicultural party on the other hand, and we're sort of stuck.
Woke neoliberalism, which is why I think, and then Trevor, please jump in. One more thing is that I do think that it's the heightening of the rhetorical game is very empowering of Democrats, of their worst tendencies, right? Because they don't actually have to challenge on a policy level as much as they would have to had Trump not been such a noxious, verbally toxic as well and person. And then of course the other thing is that we can get into this later because this is not but the foreign policy is an area where he was able to inflict a lot of damage. I guess he was more, he actually was also kind of hamstrung in that, right? Whenever he tried to take troops out, he would get called, I don't know, Putinist. And
well, and sorry, just to jump in there, but we've already forgotten this because everything changes so quickly. But in December, he vetoed the National Defense Authorization Act. Now, previous presidents have vetoed those acts. Reagan did it, Clinton did it, George W. Bush did it. And Congress basically had to modify their position and accede to the terms of those vetoes. That didn't happen here. Trump was overridden on his veto. So, even in the realm of foreign policy, he got pushback, a lot of pushback, including from his own party. But I do think, nevertheless, I do think you're right that he was able to inflict material damage, both internationally and domestically. And I don't think that's ever been the question, in question, I should say.
Yeah. Trevor, do you want? I have tons of more questions, but I know, especially since you were fanboying out earlier, I want to give you the chance to.
Oh no, I mean, I'm just listening. I'm fine.
Yeah, taking it all in.
Yep.
So talk about more about this realignment that you described and how this could happen and
yeah. So realignment is a concept that comes out of political science, and it's important, I think, for people to know about it because we tend to be very presentist and not really remember things that far back. But the truth is, there are a series of elections in American history: the election of Abraham Lincoln, the election of FDR, the election of Ronald Reagan, Andrew Jackson, Thomas Jefferson, that are elections in which a new party, it's not simply that a new party comes into power. It's a party that introduces a whole new set of policies, a whole new kind of governing narrative or ideology that previously had been suspect or non-existent. And these realignments, what they do is that it's not just that they shape politics for decades to come, such that, Eisenhower really changes FDR really changes the terms of American politics. And then Dwight Eisenhower, who is a Republican, as much as he opposes the New Deal, has to accept certain parts of the New Deal just as a condition of governance. And anybody who would try to argue the opposite of that is sort of relegated to the margins. Likewise, Bill Clinton, right? The condition of his election was, he famously said the era of big government is over. Like, he accepted the terms of the Reagan settlement. And we have been in a moment, I think, and Trump is a symptom of this, where the Reagan settlement is becoming undone and challenged. And you see it across a whole host of issues. I mean, again, look at the budgets, and the parts of the left really hate doing this because it's incredibly boring, and it's very detail oriented, and it's about finance and all this kind of fiscal policy. But Joseph Schumpeter, the great economist, said that that a state's a budget essentially is the funder of world history. It's like really where you see the DNA of the society, what it really values. And the budgets that have been passed under Trump, as I said, have been, by Republican Reaganite standards, extraordinarily liberal. The fact that the whole politics of debts and the deficits have been kind of blown out of the water. We'll see what happens in the coming months. But it seems like that language is over. The way the Fed has been governing, under a Republican appointee, has been, really accepting these low interest rates. We don't care about inflation anymore. So all of these signs point to an unraveling of the Reagan regime. And I think the real question that for me has been on the table is, why hasn't it been toppled? Like, why are we still living with it when it's so clear that it depends on things like courts, that it depends on things like the Electoral College? I mean, Republicans haven't won the popular vote since 1992, except for once. That's a real sign of unraveling. But what we don't have is an opposition that's ready to say, enough, we're going to end this. Now, I think that was what Bernie Sanders was trying to do, in his way, and not in his way. It was very clear that's what he was trying to do. And the Democratic Party made a decision. We're not going there. We are not going there. And here's where I think your point about Trump is really important, Katie. I mean, from a lot of the polling data that we know, like, the strongest argument against Sanders and in favor of Biden was, we're scared shitless of this guy Trump for good reasons. And we think this is the guy, we think this is the guy who's going to beat him. And we're not going to experiment here. We're not going to take a chance. So we can argue about that calculus to the end of the day, but that's where we are. And so we have a situation where a regime is extraordinarily weak by any historical measure, but we don't have an opposition,
right, that's
ready to deliver that death blow. And that's, we're going to be stuck here, so I feel like the real question, and it is not, what are these radical right militias going to do? I mean, that is a question. I shouldn't say it's not the real question. Of course, it's an important question. But if you want to talk about long-term political trends and political development and where we're going, I think the real question that's on the table is, what is the left going to do? Because until it does something different, we're going to be stuck where we are.
Right. The militias won't really go anywhere unless the left does something.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of course, the issue of the, how electable Bernie was, I just want to give a shout out to MSNBC for spending their entire programming distorting that reality and presenting Bernie Sanders as a doomed candidate. And not just MSNBC, but there was a beautiful article in The Hill. The headline was Trump slightly leads Warren and Biden, and a couple of paragraphs into the article, it mentioned that the reverse is true for Sanders, who slightly leads Trump.
Right.
So
yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
I mean, it's a real problem, and to be honest, I think it goes beyond MSNBC and the media. Like, I think there's both elite and grassroots constituencies in the Democratic Party who, for very different reasons, are very committed to staying the course. Mm-hmm. And the Trump argument is a very powerful one. And I think one of the reasons, frankly, why it's important, I mean, my argument is, just mostly analytical. Like, I'm not a political organizer. I'm not leading any constituency, and I'm not writing for any constituency. But to the extent that there's a political purchase to what I'm saying, it's to remind people that, like, these guys on the right, they are not they are terrifying in terms of, again, the kind of material damage that they can do, and they're vicious, and nobody should underestimate that part of them. But we are not in the era when, Richard Nixon, could say law and order, could say silent majority, and get, a strong majority, not a minority, but a strong majority of the American electorate to be, terrified and to go with him in that direction. And likewise, Reagan, and then ultimately Bush. And what, if we learned anything from this summer, from the Black Lives Matter protests, it's that kind of backlash politics. It's not that it's gone away. It's been here with us for a very long time. It's just that it's radically diminished potency politically. And I wish, everybody from liberals to the left would get, the message there, that rather than inflating this threat in terms of its political potency, like, view its diminution as an opportunity, to press for a more robust political response.
And what would, I mean, I know you have to leave soon, and this is an overwhelming question, but what would that look like, that political response?
I mean, to me, it's Nevada. It's the Nevada primary. That is the future. And I just come back to it. And I think for many of us who are pro Sanders, it's like a blip of something that happened and then got overshadowed by not just Super Tuesday, but the pandemic and all the rest of it. But just think back to that moment where the promise of a multiracial, working class democracy was on the table and suddenly seemed like a real possibility. And that was not a mirage. I mean, the Mirage is a casino or a hotel in Las Vegas, but something real, made up of, Latina housekeepers in hotels, and like, a powerful labor movement, that was putting the fundamental questions of working class democracy, multiracial working class democracy. I mean, that to me is still the future. And, we lost that round ultimately, but there's no reason to stop fighting for that promise.
Well, maybe it's that some people know that, that they know that it's inflated, and it's because they don't have to take that, because they fear that political opportunity, that they're not seeing it that way. I mean, there is a big, we got to distinguish between disingenuous and like the basket of deplorables, which are the powerful elites
Right.
Those are my basket of deplorables. And the people who are actually just convinced that, that this is the good, and separate the good out from the redeemables. And
I hate to do this, but I have to go now. And it was
great.
Thank
you. Thank you so much for coming on, for your flexibility.
No problem. And it was great chatting with you both.
Yeah, you too.
Great
and
team.
Come back on, and you'll have to tell us. You got to relive the Neera Tanden moment when she lied to you. Well, yeah.
I missed this. You got to tell me after he's gone. I didn't know.
Well, we'll read his piece. Okay. Bye, Corey. Thank you so much.
Take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
See you guys.
Bye.
See you. What was the Neera Tanden thing?
We should call. You know what? You're so good at this stuff. Like, you're so quick at this stuff. I have to find it online. You can probably synthesize it very quickly. It would probably honestly take you. It would be faster for you to just look for it. I'll get it to you though. It was something about, I think, whether
I'll take a look. We talk.
Yeah. All right, cool.
But they had some kind of interaction with each other.
Yeah, and she just lied. I think it was about whether or not she was like nodding her head when Hillary Clinton spoke about marriage existing between a man and a woman.
Wow, they have some history. They've been going back and forth since like at least 2016. Looking here.
Oh yeah. I thought you were saying that it was like history, like going back to when Clinton was saying that. But yeah, they do. Yeah. Do you guys like my setup? By the way, I wide angle. Sorry, my voice kind of quivered there. I wasn't moved by it, but got a wide angle.
Is that a laptop camera you're using, or do you have a standalone?
It is. Oh no, it's good, right? It's the Brillo.
Yeah.
It's the Logitech, and I got my. The thing is, I got my ring light is higher up.
Okay. Do you have something that turns into like more like a fisheye thing? Like how is it capturing, or is it pretty far?
It's my camera is only like this far away from me.
Oh wow, because
wide angle. It's not wide. It's not the standard. It's the wide angle. I think that's what it is. Yeah.
Okay. No, it looks good.
I look teeny.
I want to get mine like that. Mine, I feel, is like all up on me. I like how yours has a lot of. I don't know if there's a setting I can change to make mine do that.
What's your camera that you're using?
Oh wait, do you have a standalone camera that you attach to the top of the thing?
Yes. Sorry, that's what. Yeah, it's a web. It's a standalone web camera. Sorry, I see what you're saying. You were. Just
I understand. So it's not built into the laptop.
Right. Wait, why is my lighting not optimal? By the way, I'll straighten up the books. I don't care about that. What's wrong with the lighting? Yeah, tell me. Other lens, fisheye. Anyway,
that's pretty good.
Yeah. Thanks. Gordon Gnome says you will have to adjust the lighting at that angle, Katie, but it's fine for now. It's bright. I can lower I can make it less bright. I wish I'd known.
I feel the fact that it's bright looks good, but I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I guess different strokes for different folks.
I know. Just close it a little. Okay, I'll do that next time. A little bright on the forehead. I know. I mean, you know what? Now you're making me self-conscious. I'm going to lower it a little bit. Just a little bit. 1 second. I don't even know why I'm doing this. Yes, I do.
See, I like bright light and saturated colors. So that's pretty fine for me.
All right, let's see how this is. Now it's probably not going to be bright enough. Better, worse? What do we think?
It didn't look that much different, to be honest, personally, but both of them look fine for me.
All right, cool. Yeah. So by the way, we have a great show, and guys, we have, we're adding, I'm shiny. All right, fine. You're right. Thank you. You know what? Watch this, guys. I really talk about that fourth wall, taking it down. You didn't know that I wore powder. You thought I just woke up like this.
I woke up like this.
No, it's good. I wanted that. Let's see. We have okay, enough. All right, brighter looks better. You know what? Who gives a fuck, right? Let's see. I think it's fine. Kelly or Maria or Brad, tell me if you like this way or the other way.
Wait, so you can change the width of it too? Like,
yeah, you know what? I could do that right now. Maybe.
No, but you don't have to. I'm just asking if you can.
It's fine.
You got to send me that camera.
I will. Yeah, it's a good one.
I need to get a different.
So you know who we're having joining us soon is Richie Merino. Richie Merino. But also, you know who else? Okay, everyone's like, I like prior to the changes. Now I have to break it brighter again. So some people may remember this, some may not, but last week we had on Max Blumenthal, and he did an expose. He exposed an expose that he wrote that was kind of caused by the fact that I had on the show. I don't know if you saw this, T, but I had someone named Jonathan Sullivan on the show. He was fresh off of a Anderson Cooper appearance, and he came on the show. And he's the person who filmed the one of the few people who released the footage of Ashley Babbitt getting killed. And he came on the show, and then it became clear he was a little bit something was up.
Even during the appearance?
Yeah. In fact, I'm going to release that again because you can see me. I'm like, I don't know if you can see it, but
real-time car crash type
real-time kind of, yeah. And so then Max Blumenthal did a deep dive, and it turned out this guy who presented himself as a BLM supporter and a progressive and was just in the Capitol just documenting it and actually, if anything, trying to keep the peace. Well, he then released some footage of himself saying things like, let's burn this shit up, burn it down, and I have a knife, and this is our shit. Yeah. And so he was basically instigating. And then it turned out that he had been kind of various Black Lives Matter chapters had tried to get him locked out. Basically had tried to warn people about him because he's such an instigator. I don't even think he's ideological. Oh, no, he's not coming back, by the way. John Sullivan is his name, but yeah.
Is he black, or was he pretending to be a white ally, or is he something else?
He's black.
Oh, he's black. Okay.
Black. He's black, and he has a brother who is a Proud Boy, a black Proud Boy. So it's like a thing. It's like they're making a documentary about it. I'll send you the video.
I'm Googling him now. I've seen this guy.
Yeah.
I've seen this guy.
So one of the people that we're having on the show later tonight is someone who Max interviewed, Sean Michael Love, who's the editor and founder of Black House News. And he is someone who knew John Sullivan and was, let's just say, not a fan of his. And I'll
how soon is he coming on?
Sean Michael Love. He's coming on 8:45 or 9.
Okay, so we should overlap, I think.
Yeah. And then let's see. He doesn't identify his wife. That's white, right? That's a joke. And the real danger, though, is that people have been identifying him as a BLM Antifa person. So then once that footage got out, he's basically been really helpful to the right-wing narrative that it's the leftists who were responsible for the violence on January 6th. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the idea that he's not ideological really fascinates me because I feel like there's no such thing as not ideological. Like even not ideological is a type of ideology, but it's hard to decipher exactly like what is that nihilistic or something?
Yeah, I guess nihilistic, but I also think opportunism can trump ideology, which you could say is actually, like you're saying, nihilistic or self-interested.
What opportunism is kind of ideology. I feel like that's the shill ideology.
Yeah, you're right. Let's make a word for that. Shilliology.
Yeah.
That's good, right? Yeah. That whole thing. Oh, did you know what else is interesting, by the way? I'm not sure when can someone tell me when Richie's coming on? I'm not sure when he is. But by someone I mean Kelly or Maria or Brad. But did you see the whole Jimmy Dore thing on Tucker Carlson?
No, I've heard about it.
And I saw you tweet that you were like, what did you say? You said something like, there are a lot of controversies and I didn't get involved in them and I feel good about it.
Yeah, so like I saw Bali. Everyone's tweeting about Bali. I said, I'm not going to look. I don't know what's happening with Bali. I don't know. There's some thread going on. Well, I guess some thread happened with some people in Bali, and people kept talking about the Bali thread. I'm like, nope, I'm not going to look. So if you don't know, I don't know. I'll give an example of like, every now and then there's a character of the day on Twitter, like, or there's 2 or 3 characters of the day, and then you have to scramble to kind of put together what everyone's talking about, because God knows, God forbid you ever give context to a tweet, on Twitter. Then you now to the obligatory comment on thing of the day, and 2 days later, no one's talking about it. And what did you do all that for? So my whole thing is, I'm good.
And then there's the what's the other thing? There's something with Michael Moore. I also didn't see that.
I mean, like my attitude now is I'm going to wait to see if people are still talking about it in 2 or 3 days. And if they are, then I know I should look into it. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah. Well, we'll talk about the Jimmy Dore thing after, maybe, because I actually think it's a very interesting question of what right-wing media to go on, what not to go on, all that jazz. But we have our next guest on, so I'm very excited about that.
Oh, great.
And Maria, if you can you tweet out that Sean Michael Love from Black House News will be on the show, and Kelly, you can get his say hi to Kelly and Maria and Brad, everyone. You can get his I'll tell you what his Twitter handle is, but I think you're in touch with him now. But it is Black House News, so that's easy enough. So we can add that to the tweet. We can tweet it out. Okay, let me get back to where we were. We're just gonna Richie, are you ready? Give me the thumbs up, Richie, if you're ready. Great. Okay, so Richie, we're gonna bring in. He's an organizer, and we met at Harvard for Bernie, a Harvard for Bernie event last February, and he's working on some really important organizing that's holding the police NYPD accountable and politicians accountable. So I'm just going to bring Richie in, then we're going to talk a little bit, then we're going to watch a video to kick it off. So everyone, welcome Richie. Hi, Richie.
Hi, Katie. Thank you for having me on. Super excited.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks.
How are you?
This is Trevor.
Hi, Trevor.
How's it
nice
going?
To meet you. Doing well.
You know, I got to find this audio. I recorded audio of you talking at Harvard. It was an event that Michael Brooks and Crystal Ball and Megan Day, Esha Krishnaswamy, Cornel West, Philip Agnew, Nomiki Konst.
Yep. That's right.
And Piper.
Yep.
What's her last name?
Winkler.
Piper Winkler, right? She was there. You were there. Other people from Harvard for Bernie. But I have audio of you, but I have to find it and then play it, run it by you. And you gave this really moving speech about how before you Harvard for Bernie, like you didn't really have faith in like politics or the world.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a leftist at Harvard University. It's one of the most elitist neoliberal institutions out there, and I felt very alone while I was there. And it was through the organizing for the Bernie Sanders campaign on Harvard's campus that I got to meet people like Piper and James, who is now an elected city council member in South San Francisco. Yeah. So I met them. We organized Harvard's campus for Bernie, and we in addition to that, we know that movements don't start and end with political campaigns, but we were using the Bernie Sanders political campaign to spread a leftist, socialist ideology on campus. And we actually started a leftist conference. So that was the conference that you were a part of, Katie. It was really the beginning, and we're hoping to continue it going forward.
Yeah. Well, great. And tell us what you're working on now. And if you want to set it up and then we can play the video, is that the best way to do it?
Yeah. So let me give everybody a little bit of background. So I'm originally from the Bronx, New York.
Like my mom.
Oh, awesome. I didn't know that. I'm from the South Bronx, Mott Haven. It's historically speaking, it's one of the poorest, most oppressed parts of the nation. We have extremely high levels of homelessness. We are, I think we have, in terms, when you look at the congressional district that we live in, we actually have the highest percentage of people living below the federal poverty level. We're also one of the most over-policed communities in New York City in the country. If you walk around the South Bronx, you're just going to see cops everywhere. When you're entering the subway stations, you usually see, 3 to 4 cops at the entrance, and then maybe 2 more on the platforms just patrolling. That being said, it's an area that's changing rapidly as New York City is becoming so expensive. People are looking for new areas to move into. So the South Bronx is now also experiencing a gentrification and displacement crisis here. That being said, I'm actually here to talk about some of the organizing that I've been doing with a grassroots community here in Mott Haven called Mott Haven Families. And we're a group that started shortly after the George Floyd protest started. So George Floyd was unfortunately murdered on May 25th. And on June 4th, there was actually a protest happening here in Mott Haven, in which the NYPD, in a planned assault, kettled protesters in between two avenues and onto a street, and violently assaulted protesters, beat them up, and they committed 256 human rights violations in the process. It's unfortunate that this has not been spoken about enough. And that's really because most of the people that were protesting that there that day, many were, Black and brown people, from a low-income background. We don't have the resources to find legal help in these situations. And the police think that they can just, violate our constitutional and civil rights to peaceful protest and get away with it. And I'm here to talk about a campaign that we launched called #Justice for June 4th. And we really want to hold the NYPD accountable for their crimes against peaceful protesters in this predominantly Black and brown low-income community.
Okay, so should we play the video now?
Yeah. So this video, it's actually a video that was produced by the Human Rights Watch. The reason that they decided to look into this specific incident is because it's known to be the most violent response by the NYPD against protesters in New York City. And it is also one of the most egregious examples of the violence and terror that we experience here in the South Bronx. So this video that we're going to look at, it's a longer video. The full length is about 14 minutes in length. It explains the whole what happened during that protest, but we're just going to watch I think a couple minutes of it.
Okay, great. Thanks. Maria, can you, I'm tweeting this out now that you're on. Okay, just give us 1 second.
Yep.
Let me make sure. Is this, 1 second.
Yeah, no problem.
Also, tell us more about yourself.
Yeah.
Tell us about your background. I really do want
to know. Yeah.
Your family's political. You also work for Some At Least Lopez. Who,
I did. So yeah. So I'm from New York City originally. I had a weird start to my life. I actually started my career off on Wall Street. I actually have a background in finance. But I just, saw the dichotomy of working in an extremely privileged place with extremely privileged people, and saw and heard a lot of very ignorant things. And I decided to go to graduate school. That's where I ended it at Harvard. I got my master's in public administration there. And it was really through my activism, really started about 4 years ago, when maybe 5 years ago in 2016, when I heard about Bernie Sanders. Didn't really know who this guy was, but really just found myself agreeing with a lot of what he was speaking about. And he really called out the Democratic establishment for their corruption and their hypocrisy. And I agreed with a lot of what he said. And over the last 4 years, I've just been organizing across a variety of different issues, but most recently over the past year have really found my political home in organizing for justice for protesters, and really exposing the NYPD for their crimes and human rights violations.
Alrighty, so let's go to the videotape, as they say.
All right.
Okay. And we will then get to, sometime soon, we'll get to the, of course, to the super chats. If you have any questions for Richie, of course, ask them now, and we'll get to them when he's here, and then the other ones we'll get to after. Okay.
Someone said have my babies, Katie. Which I thought was a
we'll
great
talk
thing
about
to
that
have.
after.
protest calling for racial
Richie,
justice and an end to police brutality swept the United States in late May, following the death of George Floyd.
Sorry, let me play this again. Also, does this... Sorry?
You can start at around a minute if we want to.
Oh, a minute? Okay. So that's all right.
This starts talking about the actual protest. The first minute was just an intro.
Okay, great. Okay.
That's a good place to start off.
All right.
On the evening of June 4th, around 300 protesters gather at what's known as the Hub, the intersection of 149th Street and 3rd Avenue in Mott Haven, a predominantly Black and brown neighborhood in the South Bronx, for one of many marches happening around the city that day. It was a peaceful protest, but this march would end with a violent police crackdown and mass arrest. Human Rights Watch has interviewed and reviewed testimony from dozens of witnesses and analyzed over 150 videos taken by protesters and bystanders. We found that the New York Police Department used the 8 p.m. curfew to justify a plan to trap, assault, and arrest the protesters. The march was organized by a number of local activist groups. Mott Haven has some of New York City's highest rates of poverty and homelessness and is one of its most heavily policed neighborhoods. Its residents have suffered the consequences of systemic racism for decades.
Fuck the police! It was an FTP rally, and FTP can mean a lot of different things. Free the people, feed the people. Most people know it to mean F the police. There was a lot of energy, a lot of anger, but honestly, a lot of optimism.
The march twisted and turned through Mott Haven, at one point reaching the Patterson houses, home to thousands of residents who were especially hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic.
People were very, very excited as we were passing, and you could just feel the energy from people who were hearing us from their windows.
As the marchers headed down Willis Avenue, more than 50 police officers blocked the street.
Yo, we gonna go around.
The march redirected down 136th Street. And in the final minutes, just before the 8 o'clock curfew, instead of allowing or even directing the marchers to disperse, the NYPD diverted its bicycle officers to block the marchers just as they reached the intersection of 136th and Brook Avenue. And from behind the march, a line of officers blocked the protesters from turning back. It's a tactic called kettling.
Yo, you're corralling us. Where the fuck are we gonna go? Where do we go? Where do we fucking go? You're corralling us.
Police have us fucking surrounded right now. Police got us trapped. They fucking out here right now on the bullhorn telling us that we can't be here after 8. I got your phone, babe. And we ain't do nothing wrong. At about 7:45, they intentionally started cornering us. They have us pushed in a pin. We are trapped. We are trapped right now. Whatever narrative is spun to you later, do not believe it. They have helicopters overhead. Before 8 o'clock, they was already out here trapping us.
Beginning at 8 p.m., the citywide curfew.
With most of the protesters trapped on 136th Street, one of the march's organizers, Shannon Jones, had gotten cut off from the crowd.
No justice, no peace.
She becomes the focus of Chief Terrence Monahan, the highest-ranking uniformed officer in the NYPD.
Yo, I'm not fucking with y'all. Get the fuck back.
Meanwhile, soon after the 8 o'clock curfew arrives, the police moved in on the crowd trapped in the kettle. On the north side of the block, without provocation, an NYPD legal department official directs officers to arrest the legal observers, who were clearly identified and had permission to be out after curfew.
And a young lady that was in the middle of the kettle tried to show documentation to the police officers that, you know, we were essential workers and we were allowed to be out past the curfew.
Sir, what's your name? Oh!
They body slammed the young lady to the ground and arrested her. Around the same time is when they started rounding up all of the medical workers.
Other than essential workers.
So once the medical professionals and legal observers were out the way, the police really just started cracking down on the protesters with impunity.
We are peaceful, what the fuck are you? We are peaceful, what the fuck are you? We are.
Okay.
The protesters had already been forced to break the curfew.
All right, so that was this really disturbing video. Can you tell us more about the status of that? What wound up happening, and also the status?
Right. So one of the things that I really want to highlight about this video is that the police, the NYPD's response was planned and coordinated. So you could tell that it was planned and coordinated based on the number of police officers that were there. They initially started off with like around 50 officers, but then they started calling in more officers. I think some of the protesters said that there was double the number of police officers than there were protesters. And you could see that it was coordinated by the helicopters that were flying above the protesters. And some of the witnesses also said that there were snipers actually stationed on top of surrounding buildings. And when you look at the police, they're heavily armed, heavily militarized. And they're using a lot of tactics that we unfortunately see being used against minorities and in other countries and in war zones, really. So you could see that the tactics that were being used were warlike tactics. The way that they scream and yell their commands, it's like almost like they're going into battle. You know, these are peaceful protesters marching through the streets. They were completely nonviolent. And what's insane is that both NYPD Commissioner Shea and NYC Mayor Bill de Blasio the following morning justified the police's response by lying and falsely accusing these protesters of being violent and armed, which they weren't. I mean, there were so many legal observers there, and it wasn't until very, I guess, many weeks later that the NYPD finally came out and said, "Oh no, we actually didn't get any weapons from the protesters."
We didn't get any what? Sorry, we didn't get
they didn't get any weapons from the protesters. Yeah. So they were falsely smeared as being violent and aggressive. And they were just peacefully marching. You know, the reason that this response was so violent in comparison to some of the other protests that were happening around the city was because they were also going through New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA projects. And public housing, and they were growing, and there was a lot of support locally from the people there. You know, it was growing. People were seeing them. You know, they were going to go into another public housing complex that, and you know, and the police officers wanted to cut it before the protesters walked in there and grew even larger. So in terms of like what has happened since, so there, the other thing I want to mention is that was talked about in the video was that the NYPD legal officers were instructing the police there to arrest legal observers and medical professionals, which is illegal to do. Legal observers and medical professionals were considered essential workers during the pandemic, and they were allowed to stay out past 8 p.m. The 8 p.m. curfew that was, again, unconstitutionally placed on the city by Mayor Bill de Blasio. In terms of where we are now, so Mott Haven Families, like I said, is a grassroots organization that started really as a result of this June 4th protest. So immediately following the June 4th, kettling by the NYPD, we started gathering in front of the 40th precinct, which is just a couple of blocks away. And we've been protesting there every single Sunday since June 4th. We've been meeting there every Sunday at 10 a.m. And we're just growing our presence there. And we're really trying to get answers because we've reached out to our city council members. So City Council member Diana Ayala is our city council member. And we've reached out to her. We've received very generic responses about, supporting protester rights, but always sidestepping our questions. And what we're trying to investigate and find out is who specifically and individually was responsible for the planning and execution of the response by the police. And we want names. Like, I want a list of names of people that were responsible for this. I want a list of names of the police officers that were there that day. And we also want all those people to be fired and held accountable for their crimes. In addition to that, we saw ICE agents who were there that day protecting the 40th precinct. We also saw Homeland Security agents that were there that day. It was just an unprecedented response by the police officers that we've never seen before. It was very authoritarian. It was fascist. And we are scared that this can happen again if this just gets swept under the rug, which the NYPD and their enablers, which are City Council member Diana Ayala, City Council member Rafael Salamanca, both of which sit on the investigations committee in the New York City Council and have done nothing about this. And Mayor de Blasio, who has done, who has also enabled and allowed this authoritarian response, fascist response by the NYPD to continue.
So who are the people we have to put on notice?
Diana Ayala is the city council member who is basically unwilling to do anything about this. This is her district. All of this, she's my representative. She has done absolutely nothing. I get her newsletters that her office sends out, and she's very friendly and chummy with the police, always taking pictures with them, backing the blue, and we're trying to place pressure on her because we know she's not going to act on her own. We need to pressure her in order to spearhead this investigation, especially since she sits on the committee that would have the power to investigate this. And, again, she's sitting on her hands and choosing to sidestep the issue.
Hold on 1 second. I just want to respond. I shouldn't respond. Yeah, this is a free chat. I can also kick you out and ban you from the chat. That's also my right to do. Sorry, I don't mean to do this, but can you pause? I should have just banned the person, especially because you didn't give me any money to respond to this. But I don't mean to go all school marm. But yeah, I'm asking people to pay attention. Stop complaining. Boo, is this a free chat or not, Katie? No, it's not a free chat. I mean, it is mostly, but I'll do whatever I want because it's my channel. And someone said, what is this? This guy's a free speech this guy's decrying fascism while asking for names. He's asking for the names of people who are working That's not a fascist move. That's called accountability. Okay. So I don't know if you can't see the difference. I'm calling you in and I'm inviting you to consider it that way. And if you keep going, maybe I'll call you out, but I don't know. All right. Go ahead hold on one second. Go ahead and ban me. Okay. Mm-hmm. Should I put him in timeout? Wait, let me do this. Let me ban you. I'll put you in a timeout. Why not? All right. All right. There we go. Sorry, Richie. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all I want to say is that if you look at, an essential worker such as a cashier at a supermarket, if they yell at a customer or are rude to a customer, that's grounds for being fired, right? So the NYPD, they just assaulted and attacked peaceful protesters violently. And why aren't they being fired, right? If anybody in any job punches somebody, beats them up, and that's grounds for removal, grounds for dismissal, and they must be held accountable for it. So why are the NYPD allowed to do this? A lot of what you saw is shocking, but it's not surprising. At the same time, it's not surprising because we've seen it time and time again. Why are they allowed to keep, why do they get privacy? Why can't we just get the names of the individuals responsible for them?
Yeah.
Exactly. We're demanding transparency and accountability. If we don't have a transparent and an accountable government, that's going to investigate and let us know, who is responsible for this wrongdoing, then what do we have? We're not going to be able to trust our government.
Right. I mean, we can have a whole other discussion about the best way to deal with this stuff, honestly, if people believe in re-education programs but it's certainly not like it's the norm. That's what you do. You ask for people's names when they commit, when they abuse their authority and they abuse their power. And I mean, the cops, it's like, it's not like police are raked over the coals or are very, are used to facing a lot of consequences for their actions, right? Like this is not some, we're not talking about like teachers or some maligned organization or something, maligned profession.
Right, exactly, because a lot of these officers hide behind the NYPD organization, right? So we keep hearing about the NYPD that did this, the NYPD did that, and it's so hard to hold people accountable, to hold the NYPD accountable. And we feel that if we have the specific names of the individuals that were behind the planning of this, then we can push for their removal. Right. We're asking for those individuals to be fired. We're asking for those individuals to be held accountable, again, for violating the constitutional rights to peaceful protest.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's interesting because like how do you balance that? And you don't have to answer this question now. And you also don't have to read the chat. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to subject you to that. I mean, I love a lot of people in the chat. I told my chat the other day that the obnoxious ones, they're like APAC, they're like loud, but they don't represent most of them. But and hopefully they're not funded and politically connected, but I'll see. I guess we'll see. But how do you reconcile that with and I don't think there's a contradiction, but like abolition or police reform, how do we do that? And also accountability. I guess I just answered the question. You do both things at the same time, right?
Right. Yeah. So I'm somebody who I'm supportive of the defund the police movement, but I see that as a step towards abolition. I personally want to live in a world with no cops and no jails. And the reason that I'm saying let's hold these people accountable is because we need to start removing these people and stripping the resources and stripping the power away from the NYPD, right? And that is a process, right? Because the NYPD and the unions that a lot of these officers are a part of, they're extremely strong, and they have all of our representatives at the local level wrapped around their finger. They control them. They control De Blasio. They control most of the city council. And what we need to do is start identifying these people who are, the ones with the power, the ones with the ideology. Because a lot of these officers, look, we actually do have a lot of Black and brown officers in New York City, right? And a lot of them do come from low income backgrounds, right? But you know, they get sold this false promise of, you know, you're doing good for your city, you're giving back to your community, blah, blah, blah. And then they just, you know, the problem is systemic, because once you enter that system, there's just so much pressure to, you know, be one of the guys, you know, and be one of the pals, and everybody just wants acceptance, and they start, you know, kind of falling into this abuse of that is normalized within the police, abuse of protesters, abuse of normal everyday people. And what ultimately what I want to do is I want to abolish the police. But in order to do that, we need to start tearing down the leadership of the NYPD, because I know that all of this planning and execution was done at very high levels. You know, we're assuming that Commissioner Shea was, you know, obviously was a part of it. We're assuming that the chief of department, Terrence Monahan, was also responsible, but there must have been more, right? You know, there was so many different NYPD subunits that were there. You know, ICE was there, as I mentioned before, Homeland Security was there. So it's like, who is the mastermind that's doing this? Let's identify them. Let's get them out of there as a step towards, you know, breaking down this white supremacist institution.
Yeah. Also, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, T. Also, do you want to jump in? Or?
Yeah, I was going to ask, how do you feel it's going nowadays, now that the news cycles kind of move past a lot of this stuff? And if you're having trouble keeping people engaged, and what your strategies have been about as far as that goes, because one of the frustrations I have is I feel like a lot of this stuff, there's no attention span in the media anymore, and you know, people move on to, you know, Trump time, inauguration, news stuff go. I was kind of curious about if there has been a challenge, if not keeping people within the organization engaged, then at least keeping the media focused on what you guys are still doing, and what kind of strategies you found work as far as that goes.
Yeah, so one of the things that I completely understand where you're coming from, just because, you know, people have Trump derangement syndrome and are just like obsessed with talking about Trump, even though he's out in a couple of days. And that's a whole nother thing that just irks me, you know, is that there's so much focus on national politics, and people are ignoring what's happening locally in their communities. I'm one of the people that have been kind of tuning out a lot of the national politics, and I decided to just focus on organizing as local as I possibly can, which is why I'm a member of this organization, Mott Haven Families. It's a neighborhood-based organization, and the way that we've been keeping people involved and hopeful, right? Because there's a lot of pessimism, nihilism from people in the community, just because, you know, there's just been decades and decades and decades of abuse and violence that they've had to endure. And a lot of people are at the point where they just don't see any hope in change, right? So what we've been doing, as I said, is that we've been protesting in front of the 40th precinct every single Sunday at 10 a.m. on the corner of 138th and Alexander Avenue, if you want to join us. And we've been there, visible, present, you know, as people walk by, we have flyers. We have flyers with, you know, information on what happened on June 4th, why we're there, the steps that we've taken to hold the NYPD and the representatives that let this happen accountable. And we've been seeing our numbers grow steadily, right? And, you know, sometimes we'll see people walking by and they'll just, you know, give us, you know, a high five or an elbow bump, and they're like, hey, I see you guys here every single weekend, you know, I support what you're doing, you know, thank you so much for doing it. Like, we need people to stand up and you know, and fight back, right? Because at the end of the day, we want to protect ourselves, we want to protect our community, right? Because what we saw on June 4th was just violence. Like, there's no terror, that there's no other way to describe it, and we're trying to defend ourselves as well, right? Because if we get our right to peacefully protest, then we have nothing left. So to get back to your to your main question, it's just visibility, just standing there militantly every single Sunday. We're there through sleet, rain, snow, you know, sub 32-degree weather. We're there, very bundled up, but we're there. And we're not going to let this get swept under the rug. And, you know, if we don't do anything, if we don't continue being there, it will get swept under the rug, unfortunately. So yeah, it's just visibility and just staying committed.
Should we, there's a question that someone had, and it's a big question, so you don't have to answer it. And if you, and because I have another challenge that I have another thing I want to bring up, but someone asked, Katie, could you have someone, maybe Richie, explain what abolition of police would look like? I don't know if that's really a big thing, so don't worry. I've had on people talk about this, Alex, Vitali, and I can talk about it more later. And Richie, you, of course, you're welcome to, but we can have you on another time to talk about that, because that's a very long question.
It's such a long question, and but you know what? One thing that I will say is that if you look at if you look at safe neighborhoods, you know, there are no cops there. Look at wealthy and safe neighborhoods. Do you see cops there? Does cops equal safety? It doesn't. You know, we believe as abolitionists, we believe, especially as somebody who is a person of color, you know, somebody who comes from a low income background, we believe that we are safer without the police, you know, because the police are here again to control us and to protect white supremacy. They're, at the end of the day, the police care more about protecting white supremacy, protecting private property, than they do Black and brown lives, right? The police officers and their supporters are up in arms if protesters, you know, break a window, right? But, you know, if an unarmed, you know, Black man or woman is shot and killed, then they usually say, oh, they deserved it, whatever, they don't care, right? It just, you know, we believe as you know, as people of color, we believe that we are safer without the police there, and we believe that we can, we believe in community, like community control, community protection. We believe that we can defend ourselves. We don't need the police to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember a couple things. One is that, you know, I think it's totally consistent to say you want police reform, abolition, and also hold individuals accountable for the abuse that they've perpetuated, because it's easy to be like, we want systemic change. No. It's not easy to demand systemic change. It's easy to say and diagnose the problem as a systemic one, which it is. But in the meantime, I don't expect people to like risk their lives at the hands of especially abusive police. So it's not like that will solve the problem, but it does, you know, it's a reasonable expectation for people to be, individuals to be like singled out, punished, and perhaps removed. The other thing I wanted to say is that, I had Alex Vitali on, who wrote The End of Policing, and I remember asking him about what abolition would look like. And in fact, our next guest who's coming on can talk about this too, because he's an abolitionist. But what he said, which I thought was really interesting, is like, what did he say? He's like, well, Katie, abolition already exists in some places. Like if you go to a private school on the Upper East Side, and truth confession, I am from the Upper West Side, but I did go to a private school on the Upper East Side. And he's like, if you go to a private school on the Upper East Side, they already have abolition. Let's say you're caught using drugs. What do? They take you to the guidance counselor. And then if you don't listen to the guidance counselor, then they'll bring in your parents. And then if you don't listen to your parents, they'll, you'll go to rehab, and then you'll go back to school. And it's like, oh yeah, that's abolition, which is not, obviously that doesn't mean everyone send your kids to a private school on the Upper East Side. The point is that there are ways to deal with things that aren't punitive, that don't cause more damage. Because that's actually not the point, being punitive, because that's just creating more harm.
Right. Can I just plug one more thing in about abolition? Is that, as abolitionists, we also believe about addressing the root causes. That people say, we need police because we have crime, right? And people are committing murders and blah blah blah, and we need police. Okay, well, let's talk about the root causes of crime, right? The root causes of crime is poverty, right? So people have to resort to stealing things in order to survive. These are what we call crimes of survival. And if we took resources away from NYPD and instead use those resources to invest in housing, education, and food programs, and guaranteeing those things as human rights, right? These are things we need to survive. We need housing, we need food, we need education, we need, We need access to public transportation. Like, these are all things that we need to survive and to live dignified lives, right? And everything that I've just mentioned has been severely underfunded, and budgets have been slashed, you know. And the NYC Parks budget is, I think, 1% of the city's budget, which is insane, right? And then when you look at whose budget keeps increasing year after year after year, it's the NYPD.
Right.
So so we believe in investing in education programs, guaranteeing housing as a human right, guaranteeing food as a human right as well, so that people don't have to resort to crimes. And if you look at the percentage of violent crime, 95% of crime is, like, maybe even higher, is nonviolent, right? It's petty theft, if what it boils down to, or jumping turnstiles, whatever it may be. But if you look at actually violent crime, you know, murders, rapes, things like that, that tends to be around 5% or less of crimes. And in those instances, we can go, we're going down another rabbit hole. But I believe in rehabilitation. And I believe that a lot of the reasons that people commit violent crimes is due to a lack of mental health resources. So I also believe in funding mental health resources. Everyone should be able to have a psychiatrist or a psychologist to help them work through their mental health. We have to exercise our mental health as much as we exercise our physical health. And the reason I believe that deep down that the reason people commit these things is because they're not in a good mental place, and we need to invest in resources to ensure that people are there.
Well, yeah, and one of the stories from the Force the Vote town hall was Scott, whose son Danny was behind one payment. He missed his payment for copay, and that couldn't afford he missed a very small amount of money, and then he would have had to have paid $250, which he didn't have. Yep. And he was on an antipsychotic, and one of the withdrawal symptoms is suicide, and or suicidal behavior. And then he couldn't get the meds, went into withdrawal, and then buckled him into his safety belt into a car and drove it into the river. And these are very scary life and death issues. And that's just one example. That's not a police issue, but it just shows you how commodified life is. And also, like, people who have mental illness, police have no idea how to deal with them. Absolutely no idea. And then they get called, and then someone calls. Well, I think fewer people are doing this, but like if someone calls, their loved one calls the police, imagine calling someone, the cops show up and kill the person you were worried about, which happens. And
that's right.
It's really
I believe that most of the calls that 911 receives can be handled by trained counselors, mental health counselors, or social workers. People who are trained in dealing with domestic issues. Right? There's a lot of 911 calls for domestic partners that are in some kind of conflict, and the police shouldn't be there. The police shouldn't show up with a weapon because you flinch and they'll draw their gun and shoot, and claim self-defense. And we don't need that. We don't need to have a gun pointed at us just because you felt unsafe. No, you didn't. We know you didn't, and we know that you do that because that's the only thing you're trained to do. You're just trained to shoot and kill. Yeah.
Well, I just wanted we're going to bring on our guest in like 5 minutes, if that works. Sean, 5 minutes work to bring on. Okay, awesome. Because I want to have you overlap with Sean from Black House News, because I think you guys, if that's okay, Richie, if you have time, conversation. But I do want to do this new feature, call them out. Let's do it. Who's the people on Twitter we need to call out? Who are the people who have ignored this story, who we need to make sure pay attention to it? And we're going to tweet it out now live, and then we can see if they respond during the show. So who are we calling out? Ayala, who are some of the people? We'll oh
God. The person that really needs to be called out is Diana Ayala. She is a New York City council member that represents Mott Haven and East Harlem.
Okay.
So
let's tap this tweet right now. Hold on.
Yep. She's one person.
All right. People are like, oh, we can see your DMs. No, you can't. Who cares? All right. All right. So what are we saying? So, okay, that one was open. So what are we gonna say?
I think we can tell her that that she needs to respond to Mott Haven families. We just released an open letter today. So she should have that in her inbox already. And we want answers. We want her to actually advocate on behalf of the people that she's supposed to represent. Well, represent us.
Okay.
So don't be found. Yeah. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Here it is, right? This is her?
Let me see if I can find her.
I think it's, can you see the screen? Am I sharing it? Yeah. Oh, wrong. Sorry, guys. Oh, sorry. Here we go. Is that it? Okay. Dear, can you see this now?
That should be her.
All right.
Yeah, Diana Ayala, NYC. Yep.
Okay. Why? So what's the question?
The demand is, why have you ignored holding NYPD responsible for their human rights violations committed or, against peaceful protesters on June 4th?
Protesters on June 4th.
Mm-hmm.
As documented by Human Rights Watch, we can rope them in, right?
Yep, documented by Human Rights Watch. Yep. Exactly.
Politics sometimes we don't like because they can be a little imperialist, but
right. But
okay. Come on, guys, come on.
I'm not here to defend the organization as a whole, but they have done some good work.
Yeah, of course.
Covering the events on June 4th.
Same thing with Amnesty or whatever. Yeah, come on, guys.
Mm-hmm.
Hold on, let me get their Twitter. HRW, great. They do good stuff on Israel too.
Oh yeah, and they've been very supportive. We held a press conference earlier today when we released our open letter. We delivered our open letter with our demands over to the NYPD today, and Human Rights Watch sent a representative to speak at our conference, which is great.
Do you represent your community, or what? What should we say? And this is from should I say Richie and should I say Mott Haven families want to know?
Yeah, exactly.
Because we may not want Mexican commie. I like that. But, BX commie.
I think somebody called me something along those lines one day, and I was just like, I like it. Yeah, I am a commie. Call me a commie.
I'll own it. Yeah.
What's your Twitter handle? I tweeted.
Mott Haven fam. Mott Haven fam.
Okay, fam. And then what can we say? Where a woman was, where medics, people will like this.
Where legal and medical observers were illegally arrested.
Okay, watch this. Do you approve of the illegal arrests of legal observers and what is it? Medical what?
And medical professionals that were there to actually treat protesters in the event that they were injured, which they were. But what the police did is that they actually arrested the legal observers and the medical professionals first before they went in for the attack. So we had Mott Haven residents who were, hurt. They were beat up, punched, and they were not given any medical treatment while they were held in jail overnight. And unfortunately, that's because the NYPD arrested the medical professionals so purposely, so they wouldn't be able to treat injured protesters.
It's violations they committed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Against peaceful protests on June 4th, as documented. Yep. Do you approve of the illegal arrest of let's just say we don't need illegal. I think that's known, right? Do you approve of arresting legal observers and medical professionals there to? I should have. Sorry, this is last minute. It's okay, guys. If anyone has any suggestions, let me know.
You can. Why don't you take out the Human Rights Watch?
Yeah, we'll put that later, right?
Just leave the handle, and then that'll create a little bit more. Yeah, there we go.
Let's see. Dear, why have you refused to hold it for the Human Rights Commission? Do you approve of arresting legal observers and medical professionals there to treat
They're there to help injured.
Or why don't we just say, do you approve of arresting legal? What about this? Do you, the police, why have you refused? How about this? No, I like that. Do you approve of arresting legal observers and medical professionals?
There we go. Perfect.
I mean, it sounds so right? Doesn't that sound like something people be like, oh, the terrible people of the North Korea or whatever, Russia, blah, blah, I'm not going to play that card, but you can just imagine people being like, I'm calling out the hypocrisy of people who do that, obviously. You know what I'm talking about, Richie.
Absolutely. I know.
Do you approve of arresting legal observers and medical professionals? Is that democracy? Is that what democracy looks like? How's that?
I love it. Perfect.
Now I want to tag you. Why have you refused for the human rights violations they committed against people? Do you approve? You know what? We've got to move that because I want the Mott Haven. Asking for.
How about respond to Mott Haven families? Respond to Mott Haven families' open letter.
So you guys already sent the open letter and everything, and nothing has happened?
Yeah, I mean, we officially sent our open letter today, but we have been trying to get answers from her for the last couple months now, for the last 7 months. And we've just been sidestepped. We, she and the other representatives mentioned have been saying, oh, we didn't know that this was happening. And we have reason to believe that they did, because there is an individual who is with the Business Improvement District of the South Bronx, who basically said that he was informed that the police was going to do this at 3 or 4 a.m. that morning. So we're assuming that the representatives were also informed as well. So,
all right, everyone has to like that tweet, retweet that tweet, actually retweet it, because we put them on notice.
Yes, thank you, Katie, for that. We really appreciate that.
And we're going to bring in our next guest. I think you guys will have a really a lot to share. Let me just read you his intro. Sean Michael Love is the editor and founder of Black House News. He is a Washington, D.C. based abolitionist, activist, and photojournalist. And Black House News focuses on promoting literacy, advocacy, and creativity in the community while telling the stories of the uprising through the Black abolitionist lens. So let's bring on Sean Michael Love. Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's great. We can hear you great. How are you?
Doing well. Glad it was a boring day in DC.
Yes. Congratulations. This is Trevor with the, I was going to say with the glasses. They both have glasses. Trevor in the black shirt, Richie in the yellow shirt.
Hey,
and are you go by?
Is
it me or is it you, or can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
I think my computer's frozen.
Oh no. Well, you're not frozen to us.
Hello?
But Sean, I'm sorry, do you go by Sean Michael or Sean?
Sean Michael.
Okay, Sean Michael.
Yeah.
And Sean Michael is someone who spoke to one of the people who Max Blumenthal spoke to when reporting on Jonathan Sullivan. So thank you so much for that. And can you, and Trevor, you're not frozen to us. Let me just tell him.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. It just cleared up right when. Did I freeze it all for you guys or what?
No, you didn't.
Okay. So I was just frozen on my end then. Okay. So, but it seems to be working now.
And as you were on the show, right? I said this when you were there, Trevor, just so we're on the same page, right? That Sean Michael was one of the people who spoke to Max Blumenthal when Max Blumenthal was investigating John Sullivan and how he had been kind of wreaking havoc in various cities by instigating things.
How are you, Sean?
Good.
So can
nice to meet you, Sean.
Oh, sorry. No.
Nice to meet you.
Can you tell us about both that, but also what you're working on in terms of organizing and what you want people to know about?
Yeah. So in regards to, I'll start first on what we're working on. Right now, it's just really organizing all the independent media and photojournalists and journalists that are out telling the story from the left lens and specifically the anarcho-abolitionist lens. I think now is more important than ever than to have people on the left really try to push the pendulum back in the right direction in regards to this nation.
The correct direction, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's always an arc to justice, and it's really important that we start bending it in the correct way. So far, mainstream media has been trying to stay in the middle or moving to the far right. The far right has been winning the media battle. So I've been working with several different independent media, photojournalists and journalists, trying to make sure that the story of the people on the ground, especially the Black and brown voices, the most vulnerable voices, get heard. A lot of the work isn't just taking down statues or going into a Walmart or something like that. There's a lot of mutual aid programs that have been developed that more people need to know about. There's a lot of individual stories that people need to hear. So we're doing our best to make sure those stories get told as well, and organizing with other local organizations to make sure that they start coming together and build that camaraderie that we need to see on the left, that people have been wanting to see for a long time. Through that camaraderie that's been building for quite some time is how we were able to get the word out about John Sullivan. The cool thing through what we've been going through the summer is that independent media and photojournalists have started to get to know each other. It's something that I've been really, really focused on from the very beginning. Because one thing we noticed is that photojournalists and journalists in particular, especially after June 1st, we were the first ones to get hit. So we're the first ones to get tear gassed along with some of the frontline protesters. So if we don't work together to keep each other safe, we're just going to be out here limping and going through a lot of trauma without any support from our peers. So I've been working with a lot of independent media and journalists, and through that conversation with some Portland folks, we discovered some infiltrators and instigators that were always causing a problem in Black and brown spaces, and what I would call Black liberation spaces, not just BLM spaces. But John Sullivan would come into different spaces, instigate violence. He also, not being from a particular city, he would travel around because he had the money to do so, and lead and guide people to areas where they would eventually get kettled, where they would be endangered by the police and subsequently get arrested. And what we kept finding, which is really troubling, there's two things that were really troubling about this particular individual. One is that everybody would get arrested and he would be the first one to get released. So that's like a red flag right there. It's like, why is this guy keep walking away when we still have guys in there for a couple days? One of our individuals here, Tony, just got out this past Friday. He's been locked up since July. So just giving you kind of context. What June
1st?
No, from a July protest.
Oh, July protest.
Yeah. So just understanding that some of our protesters get locked up and they stay in, but he's consistently released pretty quickly, which is the first red flag. The other red flag that the photojournalists noticed pretty quickly, like we say, the cameras don't lie. He's always instigating, but never actually doing any act of violence. So,
Charles Manson.
Yeah.
Charles Manson.
Yeah. And that is to me, that's one of the most dangerous people that you can meet, is someone that is constantly instigating, constantly, gaslighting a situation, but not actually doing something themselves.
Because they don't pay the price, right?
Exactly. So he may have gotten caught in a couple kettles, but in the end of the day, he was always quickly released, and never really getting his hands all the way dirty, but then being able to profit off the situation as well. If some people may have seen his website, his store is the biggest beef per se of his whole website. So he was profiting off of the pain and suffering of Black and brown bodies for us fighting for justice. So a few folks started to investigate, and the more we investigated, it didn't even take long, honestly. The surface level stuff was just really damaging, and then the deeper we dived, the more harmful and worried we were about this particular individual being in spaces. The Rebellion Baby Twitter account was the first one to really put everything together. There were a few different photojournalists that like gave information, but Rebellion Baby, I would say they should get the first credit on really putting the painting the full picture of who he was. One of the first things I found is that who his father was. and his military career and understanding like the family dynamics. And then from finding out who his father was, a lieutenant general in the Air Force, who had a questionable military career. To just put it very baseline. But his brother is a far right organizer. So
he's
you have
like
someone,
not exactly a Proud Boy, but something called like some weird civilization
yeah.
awakening or something. Some like
Well,
very clearly alt-right thing.
yeah, exactly. They're with the Proud Boys and several other like 3%ers and the Oath Keepers. They have several what we call dark organizations that allow them to get permits to protest, because you wouldn't give the Proud Boys a permit to protest. For example, in DC, you had the the women for Trump were the ones who always got the permit for the Proud Boys. So he was kind of he has one of those organizations that acted as a dark organization for the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers that allowed them to organize in Utah, in California, and in Portland, and in New York. And they go all over organizing protests for the far right. And he was really vital on making sure the money got funneled to the right places, to the right people, so they could actually counter black and brown protest in mass, and also bring other black and brown people to those protests as well, so it doesn't look like it's completely racist. We have a couple black people here, and then they would be paid very well for their attendance as well. So in that investigation is by August, September, the alarm bells were ringing. And then by November, he was completely, I think every city that was still protesting actively throughout the nation completely banned him from activist spaces, and there was a really large social media campaign to make sure that people knew, because he was truly we considered him one of the most dangerous people to have on the ground at one of your protests. Every single time he attended a protest, people got hurt and people were arrested.
And did he have a formal relationship with these law enforcement agencies locally, or was he just kind of doing it on his own, causing dissent and leading people places?
Well, that's the biggest question, right? I hate to speculate, but I firmly believe that he's an agent of the state and fully cooperates with law enforcement.
And at the end of the day, if the result's the same too, it doesn't even really matter. But yeah.
We don't have complete evidence of that, but all the dots connect.
Got it.
Yeah, that's what I was saying before, Trevor, when I was saying like it's not even clear what his ideology is, and I actually think it's like it's actually, I think, like a bit. We don't know, and I think that it's like, given that we don't know, it's still it's almost like unnecessary, because then, well, I guess there are two issues. One is there's like a strategic issue, and then one is kind of like a moral truth-based issue, because I don't think we do know. And also, I personally think that like we lose people if we make claims like that without the evidence. Like, it's so easy to dismiss it as a conspiracy theory. And I also do think that like this is an example where it really could just be for fame and fortune. And obviously, on the record, I don't know, right? And so, but I think that, it's the problem is, and I was talking about this with Max last week, and people were kind of being like a bit like, I almost understand. People were like, oh, maybe he's mentally ill. They were being protective of him or sympathetic. And that's fine. But the truth is, like Max said, and well, what you've been saying is that there are real dangers posed, right? When you're instigating things, especially, and the right wing was pointing to this as an example of, the left infiltrating and causing this violence. And it's just, it's like very irresponsible. Yeah.
And one of the difference between the left and the right is the division. So the far right has no problem unifying on hate. So that's one problem in itself. But then on the left, what we have is that there's a great distrust already between each other, one just with the state and one with people that we would consider too moderate, too elitist, that may somewhat agree, but then there's a difference between like communist and socialist, and there's that, you know, battle in between the left that doesn't quite bring everybody together. This particular individual profits off of that division, profits off of that not being able to be truly centered in one particular ideal, because there's already division there. He can pivot depending on what city to be able to, you know, penetrate and you know, and be able to lead protests. The other problem with that is in regards to the dangers is that there are some people who really, really want to, you know, just fuck shit up. Let's just keep it real. You know, there's a lot of people that are really, really angry on the streets that it's not Marx that radicalized you. It's not Lenin or some other book that you could have read that said, oh, this is what makes me want to fight the state. You know, some of these people are angry by the violence and the police brutality that they've seen, and then they want to act against that, right? So he goes into a situation, for example, in DC for the Karan Hilton protest, where you had a lot of very, very angry people out there, and he was able to just slide in, one, because we default on trusting someone who's Black in that space. So he was able to penetrate in that way. And then also the Black bloc kind of where everybody looks somewhat the same. So you're able to blend in and then instigate and push that violence, and then lead people astray and kind of pivot off that narrative. So it's a really dangerous thing, and you see it happening consistently where the far right, when it's time to fuck shit up for hate, they're down for it, and they don't really care if, you know, you're really hateful, or if you are a neo-Nazi, or, you know, it's like, hey, we're about to go storm the Capitol, everybody, let's go do it. Oh, they're building a noose. Some people didn't like it. Some people were like, but you know what? We're here all for the same reason at the end of the day. That's one of the problems with the left, and that's why he was able to infiltrate the far right, I also think, as well, because he's like, hey, let me just be as aggressive as they were. And I also think that he had, you know, concrete intel leading up because of his brother to be able to infiltrate and know exactly where to be and what to do as well.
Yeah. Yeah. This whole thing is such a shit show. And luckily nothing happened today, but what are you worried about? What are you organizing around? What should people know about?
I'm extremely worried.
Yeah.
About the future of DC, about the future of this nation, especially the most vulnerable in DC, the Black and brown folks that are living here. Anytime there is a crackdown on, you know, First Amendment rights, it hurts the most vulnerable. And you're seeing it happen and play out in DC right now, where this city isn't our city. It belongs completely to the military. We're not able to be able to come together and gather without the threat of violence from the far right and the military and the police itself. You have to also understand that DC is the most surveilled and has the most police per capita in the nation as well. So we're dealing with intense police pressure, and that just ramped up 100-fold. What I fear is once the National Guard leaves, the far right, because of the failures of the liberals of DC not standing up to the far right the first few times, what's going to happen is that the far right will be able to come back during Biden's term anytime they want to challenge anything on the Hill or anything that Biden is saying. And we're going to see what we saw in regards to the violence that happened in November and December as well, where they're able to come in and do harm to specifically the Black and brown communities and the LGBTQ community. So inauguration isn't my worry. The next 4 years, I think we're going to be filled with a lot of violence from the far right in DC specifically. I see it becoming the new battleground for hatred, unfortunately.
And what about do you have any worries about like the surveillance state and, you know, how this will be used? We already see overtures about this, right? About how this is going to be used to justify. It's very sordid, right? Because it's like you have a surveillance state that is used mostly to spy on and you know, incarcerate the most marginalized, and then they're going to use this thing to try to justify doing that in the name of stopping white supremacy.
Right. The reality is white supremacy won't really come down until this nation is completely reformed. So you have to really take that step right there.
Right.
I do feel like it's already happening with the left and Black and brown communities. It's been happening, and now that's just going to ramp up. I'm worried in regards to anybody who's going to stand up to fascism. Like I said, within the next 4 years, because they're going to be heavily monitored. Any acts against the state are probably going to face increased pressure and also maybe increased jail time. So I'm worried about my comrades. And that's why I really call on mainstream media to really raise the flag and raise awareness on what's happening right now. And yes, we do want to go after these white supremacists, but it's up to the people to do so, and it's up to the people to stand up to it. We can't depend on the state to fight the battles that honestly white people created.
Yeah, that's actually, what do you guys think about this? I'd love to hear all of your thoughts about how to deal with this. Like, there is a, it's also hard to talk about. I think it's hard to talk about it because you don't want to sound like you're minimizing the violence that can happen, has happened at the Capitol, but you also want to like keep things in perspective and remember that there's, daily violence and violence that comes in the form of like, whether it's police violence or just poverty and all these systemic things. And so, how do we kind of put that in perspective, and also how do we ask people to like turn up and show up and turn out and show up? Sorry. Because there is the pandemic. There's COVID. People are also scared of the violence of these alt-right fringe groups. So what is the way to deal with that? Any of you, if any of you want to.
I mean, there's something that Sean Michael said that I wanted to kind of build off of. And I just want to, I guess it's the fact that the defund the police movement has started getting mainstream attraction. And there's a lot of people who are, starting to speak out, not only for defunding the police, but also, as we were discussing earlier, a full and total abolition of police and moving towards more community-centered models for protection and things, and holding one another accountable. And I think that this Capitol riot is going to be used to really just crush that defund the police movement and the movement to start stripping away those resources, right? They're going to point to this Capitol riot and say, see what's going to happen? Like, why do we want to get rid of the police, right? Without even, and a lot of people that watch mainstream media are not independently minded. They lack critical thinking skills to ask themselves, wait a second. The police just let these people waltz into the state capitol, and they cause a ruckus. There's videos of police officers like walking the rioters, escorting them, just being very friendly to them. And they're never going to ask themselves, like, why are we going to keep on funding the police if they can't protect and keep safe the Capitol? Right. And then the other thing that I don't want to minimize what happened there. It must have been a very scary situation for the representatives that were there. But I'm shocked at how fast, there was a coordinated narrative to start calling this a coup. I mean, members of Congress immediately coup. Then you have, police officers calling it a coup. You have mainstream media calling it a coup. Right. And the reason that they're doing that is because they want to, try to trick or deceive Americans who are following this story into believing that this is what a coup looks like. So whenever, we on the left, who are focused on, imperialism, we're focused on decolonization of our brothers and sisters in South America, the global South, in the Middle East, and the continent of Africa, where they experience like actual coups, right? Where the military goes in and they actually seize power, right? From, generally individuals who are on the left or people who are more socialist with their ideology, who are there to serve and use their country's resources for in service of the people, not corporations, and it's those people who have their power removed and stripped away from them, right? So why is it that all of a sudden, they were unwilling to name, instances of real coups happening around the world, unwilling to call them out, but then they're very quick to call this a coup. And so now when we on the left start talking about coups, people are going to say, that's really, like they're trying to, whitewash it, right? A coup is a very serious thing, right? So I question, how much of this was, I'm not saying anybody, planned it or whatever, but they're definitely just using this in order to crush leftist opposition to white supremacy, to the police state. They're trying to crush these movements. They're trying to crush defund NYPD movement. They're trying to crush the rising anti-imperialist movement that's finally starting to grow in the United States, right? A lot more people on the left are starting to pay attention to, what's happening in South America and the U.S. empire, trying to take resources away from our brothers and sisters down in the global South. More and more people are starting to become aware of this, and they're just trying to nip all of that in the butt using this as a distraction.
Yeah. If I can chime in real quick, one of the things, what I saw, I was on the ground that day, January 6th, and it definitely was an inside job, and it was what we would call a self coup or a Fuji coup, in regards to like historical context.
Yeah.
And it was a strategic move by the state and by this president itself. It is a response to the fight for Black liberation and the response to wanting to demilitarize this nation. When we speak of abolition, it's not just abolishing the police. It's a deeper thought that a lot of people want to just say, oh, what about the police? Like there's steps and there's different, and some people will say 10 or 12 different focal points of abolition that we're looking to in regards to changing the system as it is. Since we wrote our Constitution, France has changed their Constitution 40 times. So a chance for us to be able to change something and revamp something or redress something is actually embedded in our Constitution, and it's something that we should take more seriously, and it's possible. It's really, really important for the people to be able to take that power and move with that power. And what we are seeing is the same kind of response that the violence gave us back in the 70s and 80s when there was an uprising in the 60s, right? The 70s and 80s, the government strategically went after the far left to shut down the liberation movement. And we're going to see that the next 10 years as well, if we do not stand up as a people to fight back and try to redress the nation. So it is our right to gather. It is our right to speak up against this government, and it's also our right to redress it. The fact that we spend so much money on the military, on the police, and we're not putting that money where it really needs to be is part of the reason why the far right was out there as well. When you read some of the stories of the people that were out there that are getting arrested, they were also, some of them are, we call them the petty bourgeois, but a lot of them were in a lot of debt, had a lot of different issues as well. So some of the same things that we're fighting for could also help them as well. And that's something that, as far as like the education standpoint and the information standpoint, the mainstream media needs to be able to lean in to what the left is talking about instead of just being objective. I get a lot of criticism on being such an advocate while trying to tell the story of the movement, but I hope that more media folks are empowered to actually advocate from the positions that from the platforms that they have, to start pushing this nation to some of these more critical conversations. And it's really about abolition and kind of breaking this down and educating the public.
T, I know that you have to go soon, so do you want to just give you the chance?
I mean, yeah, like both these gentlemen are actually very active on the ground, so I feel like it's not my place to be. It was a tough act to follow. I feel like it's not my place to act like an authority on it. But I will say, when we had Bill Fletcher Jr. as a former Black Panther and current labor activist and writer and thinker. We were talking to him about all his time in movements and things that he's learned, and we asked him, with his chapter of the Black Panthers back in the day and things he's done since, what are some of the things that he would have changed the most if he, could do it all over again, or like that somebody told him back then. And one of the things he said was that he wished that the people in charge, they created an actual system of accountability, like ways to vote people out, ways to make them accountable to the people underneath. Because he said that a lot of the times when they were looking at people like Huey Newton, and they could tell that he was starting to have some kind of emotional mental break or whatever, or some of the things that Eldridge Cleaver was doing that they didn't like, or other leaders, they didn't really have a built-in system or a procedural manual for getting rid of people at the top. So people didn't really know what to do. So I think that's one good lesson. But I think a lesson that really ties into the Sullivan guy, and this is one that Bill Fletcher said that I thought was very interesting. He said that a harsh reality found out about protest spaces and activist spaces, and I'd be curious to hear what the two gentlemen here think about this. Was he said that a lot of times you're overworked and understaffed, and you feel a lot of pressure or gratefulness to accept people coming into the fold and willing to help. And he said a problem that they had with that was sometimes a lot of mentally or emotionally imbalanced people, or people looking for something, or people with a type of darkness, like people looking for things in the wrong places, sometimes get attracted to activist spaces to either fill some kind of void that they have, or as a chance to express their destructive impulses. And he said that's something that he really wished that they were more aware of, that there were different agent provocateurs, people just causing chaos just to cause chaos. And the Sullivan guy, while hearing him described and everything, it reminded me very much of what Bill Fletcher was talking about, and that this is like a age-old problem. But I don't really know, how do you see those guys coming? How do you vet them? Like, there were some red flags, and you guys did a pretty good job of catching on and everything. But I mean, to this day, the guy's still finding ways to get on Anderson Cooper, and still, and there's always going to be new ones coming.
Yeah, and I said, like, I mean, I fell for it, and then I took it down, and then it is kind of funny that Anderson Cooper and Chris Hayes, who have a much bigger team, obviously, and resources, they still haven't corrected it. Like, nothing. They haven't said, oh yeah, because Anderson Cooper, and maybe they don't want to get in trouble for like defamation or something, but like, he's not a civil rights activist or a left-wing activist, and that, at least you can say, like, there have been people who have, who's challenged that he's identified. Yeah. He's identified himself. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to address your comment in regards to the history and the lessons learned from the past till now. One of my phrases I like to say is the A in abolition is for accountability. So it's really, really important that we create the opportunity for accountability in the new age space of revolution. There is a science to revolution, and honestly, we're just in the beginning. We're just in the uprising. So it is a process that the Black Panthers went through, that we are going through now. And I think the John Sullivan case is a prime example of that growing pain that we're facing. But there's also a bigger battle that we're fighting with mainstream media as well, and the age of Twitter, for example, for people to rise really, really quickly for being chaotic and violent. The problem in mental health in America is mental health. And there are a lot of people that are very, very hurt, that are drawn to the spaces. But we also have to not recreate the spaces that the system oppresses us as well. So if we just shun everybody away and put them in, and push them away, then we're not doing our people a service. So I often encounter a lot of people that have a lot of deep issues. I've also maybe have quote unquote a traumatic past. So as many other people that we work with. But that also builds that camaraderie. And there's a danger in trauma bonding, but there's also something that can come out and be really positive. So one of the things that this movement is doing that I'm really grateful for is that a lot of mental health workers and social workers reaching out to them, making sure that we're able to get that healing, have those healing spaces. Over the summer in DC, we were doing yoga on Black Lives Matter Plaza to kind of, battle back, just instead of just going out there and protesting. You know what, we're going to do yoga in this space. We're going to meditate in this space, and recreating those spaces of healing so we can kind of not just trauma bond, but also come together as a people as well. So we are looking at the past and seeing what went wrong in the past to try to, move forward and elevate. And I just hope the public is patient with the people in the movement of today and understand that it is a scientific process towards revolution. We won't change. It's not going to just be a one night, one day. It's going to take us months to recover from what happened January 6th, and also the violence that happened in December and November. We're still recovering from June, so but the systems that are being created now, I firmly believe that these are systems that can last and sustain themselves for a long time, as long as we keep building and we keep generating public support.
I just want to respond. I just want to, if you don't mind, I mean, I can respond or you can respond, but where is this? Someone said the system isn't going to be, where is it? Something by yoga. And I don't, where is it? It was something, the system isn't going to be overthrown by yoga, but like, here, the world can't be fixed with yoga. I'm sorry, but this is performative nonsense. I'll give you, do you mind if I respond to that? And then I'll pass it to you. I mean, I think that, we don't have to, obviously, if the government's response to this stuff is to tell people to do yoga, that's not good. If like rich people's response to this is to throw their money at yoga classes for the poors, that's not good. But I think there's nothing wrong with people who are actually doing work like this to engage in self-care. I mean,
exactly.
It's not like because you're doing it instead of the pavement pounding work. And actually, I have to have these. I'm gonna start doing a monthly self-help guest or something, because Tara Brach, who wrote this book called Radical Acceptance, talks about how, like, if you want, and trust me, I have a visceral aversion to this stuff, and I think of it as like super like bougie and privileged and out of touch, but like that these things are useful for a reason. Like, yeah, they're tools that like rich bougie people have used, but they can also be used by people who aren't that. And you can't burn out, like, if you're an activist or an organizer. And again, that doesn't mean like you become a narcissist, self-absorbed person or practice what's called spiritual bypass. But anyway, those are my 2 cents. But I want to give you guys, of course, the chance to respond to that.
Yeah, I see that point. It was really just about different ways of coming together and educate ourselves, and also rebound from the trauma. Because there is some people who are just adrenaline junkies, right? That they actually do love the violence, but there has to be some balance in how we are moving forward towards revolution. So that was one of the aspects that we have. One of the most recent things that we did, and yoga was just one example, but we have this gathering that we had called Soup for Our Family. So it was bringing activists together, having soup and having a discussion on what they believe abolition is, and really having a deep discussion instead of just marching or protesting, but actually having a real dialogue with your comrades in a peaceful environment to actually engage in the philosophical discussions that we need to try to change the future, so then we can go out and actually do the work. It is really hard to stay locked in, especially when you're under so much violence, especially from police. The problem with a lot of the Black and brown spaces is that we're facing two to three layers of violence once we leave our home to try to go to a protest space. So we're encountering the police which some of us live in, rougher neighborhoods or whatever. So you got to watch your back for that. And then you're also watching your back for the police. But now in DC and in a lot of rural areas as well, you're also facing far right violence, and they've taken off the KKK hoods. So like at any given time, these far right groups, if you are an organizer, or if you are a known activist, you are facing violence from them as well. And threat of and also threats on your life as well. So that, just to get into that peaceful space, you're facing 3 different layers of violence. So how can we create a space where people are welcome, where people want to be there, and people are willing to go through that violence to be able to stand up for freedom and justice and keep coming together and be in the right mental space as well? So it's not an either or kind of argument. Everything is on the table for everybody who's willing and able to stand up for justice.
Got to give a shout out to Tangazi, who writes, yoga is clearly just one part of a strategy. Got to be flexible. Well done. Nice dad joke. And RKR345 IFI. Richie, how can we combat the efforts of government to bring down left anti-imperialism, abolitionist efforts post-insurrection?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we're seeing that right now, unfortunately, with this insurrection, riot, whatever it is that you want to call it. It's not a coup. I'm sorry. I'm firmly in the camp that it's not a coup. But what we're seeing right now is, we're seeing a bipartisan effort right now to clamp down on freedom of speech right now, right? So a lot of the I guess justification or rationalization for it is, oh, we need to stop these white supremacists from having a voice, right? And I know it's a tough thing to hear, but you have to think about, for every one white supremacist that gets canceled or banned off of social media, they're gonna cancel or ban 50 to 100 leftists, and they're gonna do it quietly, without, much fanfare, right? So when Trump got banned off of Twitter, for example, a lot of people, including, progressives, right, were clapping and enthusiastically supporting this, not realizing that, once you start, allowing the government to censor speech, cancel speech, it's going to come down 1,000 times harder on the left, right? So as we start, advocating for what are considered radical positions in America, which is abolition, anti-imperialism, defunding the military-industrial complex. I'm somebody who's strongly in the camp that I want to abolish the CIA, I want to abolish the FBI for their roles in destroying left movements in America and around the world, right? So when you start talking about these things and you start educating people on the role that these 3-lettered organizations have played in destroying left movements, right? Once those organizations start identifying people like myself or others on the left, who are really lifting the cover off of their ideologies and what they're actually trying to do, we're going to start being censored, right? They're going to be like, nope, can't do this, boom. And, we really, right now, we have to focus on ensuring that we are not censored, that we maintain our freedom of speech, that we maintain our freedom to protest the injustices, to call out imperialism by the U.S. empire around the world, and that we, that we don't allow those things to be stripped away, from us based off of from one incident, right? That's just being used to remove freedoms from other parts of the spectrum, and most notably the left.
One of the things I was calling for today, not to push back Richie too much, but I was saying for every journalist out there looking for a story, not to interview the Boogaloo Boys that were outside of the state capitol. They have enough press. They have enough of a voice. Every time you uplift those hateful messages and misleading messages, you're also drowning out the left. I'm calling not just wanting to censor, but I really want the media folks and the mainstream media specifically to be more intentional on interviewing folks on the left, to getting into the Black and brown communities, to getting to know who these activists are and uplifting their voices, because that's what's necessary.
Yes.
Too many cable news shows try to have this both sidesism that really just defeats the purpose of what free press is supposed to be. If you have somebody who's truly hateful and honestly downright a liar on the show, that honestly delegitimizes your show, and it doesn't matter if your other guest was a really good person. So it's really important that it's not just about censorship, but it's really about making sure that hate has no place at the table, and that you're intentional on finding the good folks, finding the good people, finding the people that are out there fighting for freedom and justice, making sure they get uplifted. Because far too often, and especially what we saw over the summer, leading up to this point, is that they weren't interviewing the actual activists that needed to be interviewed. They weren't interviewing the people that were the most vulnerable in the BLM and anti-fascist spaces. They were doing these really elitist type interviews for people that weren't even on the ground, and maybe giving somebody a soundbite that was catchy that the far right could be able to run with. So I just really want some intentionality from the mainstream media to make sure that you're uplifting the people that are about freedom and justice. I think mainstream media has played into the rise of fascism and played into the events of January 6th specifically. So it's up to those folks to fight back and be intentional about it.
I think that, T, do you have something you wanted to?
Oh, no, I was just going to say that I have to go, and it was great being on this panel with you guys. I'm sorry I couldn't contribute more, but, you know, I didn't want to speak on subjects that I'm not an expert on. You guys had the activism
but you're
angle.
a lawyer. You got to come back and talk about law stuff, like, because we'll talk about this another time, the censorship stuff, which is really actually interesting. But yeah.
Oh yeah, great. I would also throw out if you want to bring on, I thought about bringing on P.E. Moskowitz for that topic as well. He's pretty good on that.
I don't know who he is.
He has the book, The Case Against Free Speech. It's a really good
cool.
book.
Yeah,
I really think
on it. Yeah. I want to have Malika Jamali on too, who wrote a piece about going on Parler. I mean, I've had Malika on before, but did you see she wrote a piece of The Guardian about going on Parler?
Oh no, I didn't see that one.
Yeah. But yeah,
but he gave me a very I mean, I think he had a very paradigm shifting book as far as how to think about free speech in a way that I think is very informative. I'm a big fan of it. There's some P.E. Moskowitz, The Case Against Free Speech. I'll try to put you guys in touch. I think it'll be pretty good. Yeah. All right, guys, take care. It was great talking to you. Everybody good.
Take care.
All right. Take care.
Bye, T. I'll stay on, by the way, to interact. You guys, you've been very generous. So let me know when you want to go. Just want to say one thing though, which is that I mean, I had Shahid Buttar on, and he is a constitutional lawyer. He ran against Nancy Pelosi. He's a leftist, and his point is that he was saying that it's legit to censor Trump because he violated Twitter's terms of service. But the scary thing is that they're so arbitrary about it. And that really is the thing. And that's what I totally agree with what you were saying, Richie, about how all this stuff will bite the left in the ass. Like, you don't have to even think of it on a level of principle. And I had him on an episode with Zephyr Teachout. It was really interesting because, you know, I think a lot of people think it's like hands off, but the problem with Facebook isn't that it like permits certain speech. It's that it promotes certain speech, right? So even if you want to have like a kind of, it's not like, it's almost like a libertarian fantasy where they think no one's intervening, and that's just not true. There's a lot of, Anyway, well, this has been great. And definitely both of you come back. And I'll stay on if you want to stick around, but probably it's so awkward to do this when I want to offer a stance, but I don't want them to feel pressure. And then it's like, you know, I don't want them to feel like they have to, but I don't want to kick. Someone felt like I kicked someone out the other day. Who was I talking to? It was a dude.
I'm always down to talk,
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
liberation and abolition. My two favorite,
Same here.
favorite topics.
Yeah, same here. I, you know, it's something that I think that we have to start pushing the left in a lot of ways. And that's one thing that I'm trying my best to do, is to start making connections between what's happening in America. Because I think a lot of the left in America is so US focused and so US centric. And a lot of people believe that they're a leftist because they support Medicare for all.
Right.
So,
Right.
I'm sorry.
It's a good thing to support.
Sorry. I'm not downplaying it. Like, yes, that's great.
But also, how do we call, not that this is so corny, but also how do we do it in a way that's not like chiding? You know what I mean? Because then we lose people, and it's not on you to be that diplomatic voice. You can vent, but then some other people have to be like, guys, let's look at these other countries and stuff. Yeah.
It's just so vital to connect the struggles of Black and Brown people in America to the struggles of Black and Brown people around the world, right? Because we've been colonized by Europeans, by Westerners our entire existence. So it's important to really understand, like, okay, like what's happening in other countries, right? And I also, like, there have been successful leftist socialist movements around the world that we need to learn from.
Yeah.
Right. I was talking about maybe I mentioned Bolivia or not, but Evo Morales and the Mass Party literally fought back.
Just a movement towards socialism is what it stands for. It's not like MASS. Yeah, just so people know. Yeah.
Yeah, the MAS party, Movement Towards Socialism, Movimiento al Socialismo. They literally fought back U.S. imperialism. They stopped a U.S.-backed coup in its tracks, right? Like, that's freaking incredible. And we need to be looking at that and gaining inspiration for ourselves here in America, right? Because yes,
and the U.S. media, sorry, just really quickly the U.S. media portrayed the coup as a legitimate election and, leaned into the trope of the corrupt leftist guy. Sorry, but keep going. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And that's just one example, right? But there was a massive, general strike, like the largest strike in history that happened in India. How was that able, how did they do it? Right. There's just, we in the US, we need to be looking at what's happening around the world. There have been successful socialist movements and advancement towards socialism around the world. And we need to look at them for inspiration, right? Because here in the US, like we need to see that a lot of these movements were successful because of organized labor, right? So it was the miners in Bolivia who just said, we're not going to do anything. We're going to stop right now. Right, the same thing in India with the farmers out there, right? It's the labor, it's the working class who are able to, fight back capitalism, imperialism, and like we need to study that because we have an extremely weak labor movement in America. I think like maybe 12 to 16% of people are in unions in the United States, which is abysmal.
And unions are an arm of the Democratic Party by now, most of them.
Exactly. And a lot of the leadership of the major national unions are in the pockets of, the Democrats for the most part. And sometimes, a lot of the rank and file get ignored by leadership, but that's a whole nother story.
I meant the leadership. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want my message to those on the left in America is pay attention to what's happening around the world. Let's learn from them. Let's study, what tactics did they use? How did they organize workers in order to, achieve these feats? And we need to do the same here, right? Because as Sean Michael was saying, revolution is almost a science, like but you have to like look to others. I mean, yes, we're gonna have to, look at without getting too theoretical, we have to look at the material conditions here in America. Things aren't going to be exactly, apples to apples, but we need to look at like fundamentally what tactics and approach that they use to gain power. And in the left, I think we're not only not looking enough to the outside world for inspiration, but we're also not focused on getting power. We need to get power. We need to take power away from the establishment. And it's just like, when are we going to be ready to do that? When are we going to be ready to put our money where our mouth is, because all we hear on the left is talk. Or those who think that they're on the left talk. When are we actually going to start doing and fighting and challenging established power, entrenched power?
One of the problems with America is it's very white collar. So you do have a working class, but a lot of the people who have power are, the white collar folks. And we have a dystopic view of what the middle class is. So those people that we really need to empower and actually engage in the actual fight, they're a little bit too comfortable with that quote unquote middle class wage. The other issue that we have in America is it's a superpower for a reason. And it's strategically located, and it's a really large country when you put in perspective of all the other revolutions that are happening globally. So the farmer has to be armed in Venezuela and Bolivia for different reasons, and are facing border scares for different reasons. So they're already kind of coming together and united on a different way that it doesn't necessarily happen in America. So one, because of the landmass and the geography of this country, keeps the people that need to be organized, centralized, we're already naturally divided. So for example, I would love the Portland folks to be right with the DC folks. I would love the Philly folks to be right with, and all of that together. We may be able to really do some damage if we were all together, but we're just all in different spaces. So you have separated by geography. So I think that is the first issue. The next issue going into the America being a superpower is that they're professional at crushing revolutions, and they're professional at police brutality and their militarization. So when we are trying to overcome this system, we have to think as big as this country is, and we're just not there yet. Some of the other countries, I think there's a bit impatience when we look at what happened, for example, in Bolivia when they were storming the Congress. That necessarily, even though we just had a sample of that January 6th, but in reality, for the left to do that, that's just not a that's not a true point that we can actually move, because we don't have the self-defense measures that these folks already had.
But they just vote. I mean, they voted, right? Like it was they were able to just vote. The people who, so they were able to get. They went on. I mean, Richie, you probably know this, but more than I, like they went on strike, right? They organized, and then they were able to vote the fascists out. They didn't have to resort to a physical rushing of an edifice.
So there was that, but we don't have that. We're a little bit more divided on the left in regards to that blue collar working class side. So I think one, we have to bring those folks together. That media needs to play a big part in changing the narrative of how we look at what we call the far left, and understanding that the Democratic Party isn't a leftist party. There should be a move to develop a strong third and fourth party that will actually create the revolutionary space that we need to create the change in this nation. And the next thing is also making sure that we educate people on the harms of this country as well. So there's a lot of people who are comfortable with some of the violence that happens across this nation. They can see a Black man get murdered, and a few after a couple news cycles, they can forget about it, or they're paying attention to something else when that family is still having to deal with it. Karan Hilton's mom, for example, Miss Karen, still is missing her son. Right? We've had so many Black and brown people killed since we were chanting out Breonna Taylor's name in the streets, since we were chanting out George Floyd's name, and we still don't have justice for them. Honestly, we should still be in the streets today because we still don't have justice. But because of the conditions of our news cycles, people have just thought, okay, it's time to move on. I think we should lose that privilege of moving on from an issue that has done so much harm. And once we move into that space in this country, we'll finally start making some change.
Yeah, and one other thing, Brad said in the comments somewhere, he was saying that, I don't know, he was saying that just because it was a failed coup, being from somewhere with real coup doesn't change that. Just like getting hit by a spouse's abuse, even if your spouse isn't Ike Turner. But Brad, I will push back on that and say it's like if you get a punch on the face from someone, and there's someone who like, hold on. It's like if someone gets a punch on the face and the whole time they were ignoring or funding someone who killed someone else. All right, I'm losing the analogy, but I think the analogy is, this is part of it, is that the same people calling this a coup are people, I see Asha's here. Just give me a few moments. The same people calling this a coup are people who either ignore or vote to fund the coup that actually overthrow entire governments and states. And so while I'm not saying we should downplay it, and I do think, honestly, I think an attempted coup you have to try to infiltrate the armed forces. So for me, that's one, and they didn't try to do that. I'm not saying, look, I think, and Max was talking about this, and someone needs to, there needs to be an investigation.
They didn't have a plan. They did. What were they in there to do? They went in there recklessly and without a plan. Like, what was their strategy? They had none.
Maybe they
gave it up. I was there.
They didn't want. Right.
Like they had the capital. There was no reason for them to leave. And there's now more video evidence coming out today showing how nice they were treated once they were inside. If Ashley Babbitt didn't get shot, they probably would have stayed much longer. And like I said, there was no reason for them to leave. They had it on full.
But honestly, and I'm not downplaying it, but like if they had been well armed, I'm not downplaying it, but if they had been well armed, they would have, and also there was, we do have to look at the top down, where the hell everyone was when this happened. Because again, even if regardless of whether you think it's an appropriate response or not, it clearly is not, it's inconsistent with the way security usually is. But yeah, so that's my, that is, I think, what is frustrating for people, especially when they're from countries that, I was, born and raised here, but I'm not speaking for people from other countries, but I think it's probably infuriating to see, again, the same people who won't call the coups in your country that legit overturn. Like, look what happened in Honduras, and Obama and Hillary wouldn't call it a coup, and they lied about it too. So, anyway, I actually, but what happened that day was not intending it. Anyway, so, well, guys, thank you so much. I'm going to stay on and talk with Esha a little bit and also go through the super chats. But definitely come back, both of you guys.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me here. And thank you so much, Katie, for shining a spotlight on local activism. I just encourage everyone, please get involved locally. Start building independent, local, community-based organizations. Don't believe that the Democratic Party is going to be your savior. They're not. They're just not. We have to build our own independent political organizations with the goal of building power outside of, politics, right? We have to take care of one another. We have to defend each other, and you have to do that at the most local level.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally agree.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Katie. Make sure all your guests donate to your local mutual aid.
Yes, mutual aid.
Take care, guys.
Get Dean down again. Bye. This is my thing too. All right. Well, that was great. Thank you. And I'm gonna read some super chats, but also we're gonna invite back in. But she has to let me read my super chats. She has to be here to help me. Hold on. Let me just give her the code. Hold on, guys. Guys, come on, throw your super chats in here.